October seems like the perfect month for a crossover with Resident Evil, even if the village is kinda old now. So confession time guys, I haven't played any Resident Evil games since Resident Evil 3 Remake was an absolute tragedy. But that being said, I do like the look of the village, and Lady D and her daughters, well, they remind me of my stepsisters. Yeah, my stepsisters and their mom Linda, to the point that I found out that they actually all did these costumes at one point. Wild stuff. I had to recreate it. But that being said, I'm not going to go a whole lot into the story of the game for this video. Instead, let's talk about some of the cultural inspirations that went into the creation of Dimitrescu and her daughters. And looking into the cultural aspects of Dimitrescu while also trying to avoid story spoilers was actually pretty fun and difficult. I think I did a good job doing it. One of the things that jumped out at me from the start is the name, Alcina Dimitrescu. It's Romanian in origin, and that fits the vampire theme for her and her daughters, even if they're not made like traditional vampires like Dracula, Lestat, and so on. Pronunciation of the name was also a point of minor contentions between American fans and Romanian fans given the name's Romanian origins. Given that I try to be as culturally accurate as possible, I've opted for the Romanian pronunciation for the making of this video. But fans who have played the game are welcome to their own interpretation for how it should be pronounced, kind of like the fight over Ketsith and Ketshi in Final Fantasy VII. Dimitrescu is a breakdown between the Romanian render of the Greek goddess Demeter and Escu, a Romanian patronym meaning child of. So Dimitrescu breaks down to meaning child of Demeter. Does that mean that Lady D is supposed to be Persephone? No, likely not. Persephone and Hades only had two children, Melanoi and Zagreus. Melanoi is the Greek goddess of madness, nightmares, and ghosts, while Zagreus was the god of blood and of life. That seems tangentially related to vampires, and it's interesting to think about, but I think Dimitrescu is closer to just being based on Demeter herself. In Greek myths, Demeter has a parallel called Limos. Limos is the Greek goddess of hunger and famine. She's either taken to be a rival of Demeter, but also sometimes claimed to be an aspect of Demeter in some regards. Think of this. Demeter's power over life and death is central to understanding her complexity. When she is nurturing, the earth flourishes, but when she's angered or in grief, she withdraws her blessing and the earth becomes barren. Limos embodies pure destruction linked to famine and death, and so this radical change in Demeter's persona during the winter months might suggest that she actually becomes Limos. Lady Alcina Dimitrescu, with her combination of maternal instincts, sovereignty, and destructive vampiric hunger, can be seen as a complex figure that reflects aspects of both Demeter and Limos. Like Demeter, she holds immense power over her domain and exhibits a deep protective love for her daughters, tying her to themes of motherhood and territorial control. However, like Limos, she is also a figure of death, destruction, and endless hunger, devouring life to maintain her own strength and beauty. Her vampiric need for blood and her reign over Castle Dimitrescu make her a twisted parallel to Demeter's life-giving powers and Limos' destructive famine. Alcina Dimitrescu, by embodying elements of both creation and consumption, draws on this duality, making her an embodiment of both nurturing motherhood and destructive hunger. Then there's the name Alcina. This one's interesting. Alcina means strong-willed, which Lady D certainly is. It comes from an opera of the same name written by George Frederick Handel. This was based on an older opera that he obtained the rights to while visiting Rome and then partially altered for better linear storytelling. Alcina is the antagonist of the story, just like Dimitrescu. And also like Dimitrescu, Alcina is a powerful female figure that uses her beauty, charisma, and supernatural abilities to control people around her. Mostly men. In fact, the hero of the opera, Ruggiero, falls under Alcina's spell and becomes the burden of his lover, Bradamante, to rescue him from her spell. This also seems to mimic the story of Ethan Winters coming to the village to look for Rosemary, except instead of turning people into undead mutants with Mother Miranda, Alcina changes men into stones, animals, plants, or whatever she likes, and is aided by her sister, Morgana. Bradamante is eventually able to reach her lover and break the spell cast over him by Alcina. The two of them break the source of her magic, free all the captives, and Alcina laments on her failure until she withers away, forgotten. This seems to closely resemble the tragic love stories of Jean Racine and many Greek tragedies. Another character that is often attributed to being inspiration of Lady Dimitrescu is the Japanese yokai Hachishaku-sama, or Miss 8 Feet Tall. Obviously, Alcina Dimitrescu is a towering figure of over 3 meters tall, and apparently still wears heels? Girl. But more than just height, fans speculate on the connection between Dimitrescu and Miss 8 Feet because of the way they're dressed, typically in a long white gown with a wide-brimmed hat. Hachishaku-sama has the ability to mimic the voice of people's loved ones and lead them away. She often mocks her victims, which are primarily children, with a deep, unsettling laugh. Similarly, Dimitrescu uses her charisma and menacing dialogue to unsettle the player and intimidate Ethan while he is hunted by her and her daughters. Linda chose the Dimitrescu costume because, just like the Countess, she's a powerful and intelligent woman with a trio of daughters that she cares deeply for. So let's talk about her daughters: Bella, Cassandra, and Daniela. The most likely inspiration for these three characters are the brides of Dracula, featured in Bram Stoker's novelization of the story of Dracula, that sees Jonathan Harker travel to Dracula's castle in pursuit of his fiancée, Mina. Like the Alcina opera, Harker must rescue his fiancée from Dracula's control, but it's no easy task, and a host of allies join forces with Harker in order to see Mina to safety. This is completely counter to Ethan, who spends the majority of the game completely on his own against the four lords of the village. So, Bella. Bella is the oldest of Dimitrescu's adopted daughters and mutated by the same science that created all the monsters in the village. She's quiet with a strong head on her shoulders and worked as a maid in the castle until events took place in the 1950s. Her name in Hebrew means to devour or swallow, but in Hungarian it means heart, insides, and is typically associated with guts or courage. She shares a name with Bela Lugosi, who played Dracula and is known for his iconic cape, Black Widow's Peak, and a Romanian accent. Bela Lugosi was born in Romania in 1882 and died in Los Angeles, California in 1956 at the age of 73. Yeah, that's right. Bela Lugosi's dead. Undead, undead, undead. I noticed that Bella wears a yellow gem around her neck, and I think that's why Pearl chose her for the costume over the other two. It just sort of worked out for them like that. Pearl is objectively the smartest of her sisters, and also the most quiet. She's got these pearl earrings in, like her namesake. Cassandra is the next oldest, and her name means shining upon man. It comes from the story of a Trojan princess who was given the gift of prophecies by Apollo, the Greek god of archery, music, and dance, truth and prophecy, healing, and diseases. Cassandra was the daughter of King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy. Her older brother was Hector, the hero of the Greek-Trojan War. The older and most common versions of the myth state that she was admired by the god Apollo, who sought to win her love by means of a gift of seeing the future. According to Aeschylus, who is called the father of Greek tragedy, she promised him her favors, but after receiving the gift, she went back on her word. As the enraged Apollo could not revoke the divine power, he added to it the curse that nobody would believe her prophecies. In other sources, such as Hyginus and Pseudo-Apollodorus, Cassandra broke no promise to Apollo, but rather the power of foresight was given to her as an enticement to enter into a romantic relationship, the curse being added only when it failed to produce the desired result by the god. Given how petty and honestly grapey a lot of Greek gods were, I'm inclined to believe it was the latter. It might also be that upon receiving the gift of foresight, Cassandra realized that Apollo was not a good match for her, and that's why she decided to decline his advances. In this case, it would be Apollo's own hubris that cost him the love of the woman, but it's still nowhere near Cassandra's fault. In modern usage, her name is employed as a rhetorical device to indicate a person whose accurate prophecies, generally of impending disaster, aren't believed. Because Cassandra wears a red gem around her neck in Ari the Village, Melody wore this costume for the event, and it suits her as being the most sadistic of Dimitrescu's daughters. Melody is a fighter and takes no nonsense from men, regardless of their station. So I could see her telling even a god to cry it off. Daniela Dimitrescu is the youngest of the three siblings, and the same is true for Jasmine, who's wearing her costume. Noted as being the most delusional, but this is due to her volatile, obsessive, and emotionally unstable personality. While all of Lady Dimitrescu's daughters exhibit predatory behavior, Daniela's unpredictable mood swings, fanatical devotion to her mother, and tendency to view the world through a distorted lens of romance and power set her apart. Her detachment from reality and unhinged behavior make her the most delusional of the three, leading her to be seen as both dangerous and tragically flawed. And while trying to find a character in folklore that may have served for the basis of Daniela, nothing fit as closely as Cassandra, though a few possibilities did spring to mind. While it's not a perfect one, Daniela's character closely resembles Ophelia from Shakespeare's Hamlet. Ophelia is perhaps the most well-known figure in Western literature associated with delusions and madness. Much like Daniela's unstable nature in Hamlet, Ophelia is driven to madness by her unrequited love for Hamlet, the death of her father, and the manipulation of those around her. She becomes detached from reality, singing strange songs and eventually meeting a tragic end. Jasmine here is also the youngest of her sisters, and her story is marked by a great romance. She's also extremely dedicated to the art of the Japanese geisha. Now, let me make one thing abundantly clear. Geisha are not sex workers. During the Heian period, ideals surrounding relationships with women, sexual or otherwise, did not emphasize fidelity, with marriage within the Heian court considered a relatively casual arrangement. Men were not expected to be faithful to their wives, while women were, of course, expected to remain faithful to their husbands. So we can see these double standards around women's purity have been a very pervasive problem for many cultures. Polyamory exists. Use it. According to Confucian customs, the ideal wife was seen as a modest mother who managed the affairs of the house. Wherein love had a secondary importance to other roles the wife fulfilled within the marriage. As such, courtesans who provided not only sexual enjoyment, but also romantic entertainment and artistic entertainment were seen as both an outlet for men and as common companions. Although geisha would not appear until the 1800s, the role and status of courtesans as artistic and romantic entertainers were a tradition that geisha came to inherit, with the basic art forms of entertaining guests through song, dance, and conversation being employed and adapted to contemporary tastes by the geisha. That's all I'm going to say on that for now, though. Don't worry, I have a lot more to say about geisha once we get to doing Jasmine's bingo book. So, there's one more likelihood for an inspiration to Alcina Dimitrescu and her daughters that I'm a little tentative to mention because I know she usually watches anyone who says her name. I might as well get this over with. Morgan Le Fay. Now that I have your attention. There are also a number of similarities between Lady D and Le Fay if we look at the character as broader tropes. Morgan Le Fay and Alcina Dimitrescu are both based on the trope of the Enchantress. The Enchantress trope conveys power, manipulation, and complexity. Like Le Fay, Lady D is a multifaceted antagonist. Her actions aren't always wholly evil, as sometimes she's driven by a maternal instinct for her daughters, much like how Le Fay is toward her son Mordred. Both have a deep, protective love for their respective children. However, in Le Fay's case, her maternal instinct often gets overridden by her ambition and hunger for power. Le Fay was seen as a powerful sorceress in her time, and while Lady D might not have what we would recognize as sorcery, she's still an intimidating supernatural force to be reckoned with. They both operate with an air of vengeance. Whether it's Morgan's long-standing grudge against Arthur or Alcina hunting Ethan Winters through her castle, both women embody the idea of a powerful female figure whose wrath is both dangerous and calculated. That's not all. Admittedly, I did spoil myself on this one, but whatever at this point. So in many versions of Arthurian lore, Morgan Le Fay is given the ability to shapeshift. This comes from her Celtic inspirations of the Morgan, but I'll discuss that more in a different video. Although it should be noted that Le Fay's shapeshifting ability is more demure. She uses disguises and illusions to manipulate her enemies, and conveys a mastery over her domain. That's quite a bit different than the wild eldritch dragon monster that looks like if Bree got swallowed by a venom symbiote. Still, the spirit's the same. The case to be made for Dimitrescu's daughters is linked to Morgan's fairy sisters. These are often referred to as enchantresses that rule over Avalon, or as the Tuatha call it, Ternavok. This mirrors Alcina's desire to only have women around her. A supernatural sisterhood. I mean, in the game, her daughters are even adopted. They're a family bound by circumstance, just like Morgan is now. But ultimately, just like Lady D, Le Fay doesn't prevail. Sure, some people see Morgan as being more tragic than villainous. She started off as an ally to Arthur, complex with both good and evil qualities, but it's her ambitions and her thirst for revenge that always lead to her downfall. By the end of every cycle, she falls to being a remorseful and sorrowful figure, like Alcina after Ruggiero and the death of Mordred. Lady D and Morgan end up undone by their own ambitions. We see these sorts of characters in many stories. There's Circe from the Odyssey and Medea from Hesiod, Oscar Wilde's Salome, and even biblical characters like Lilith. They became the women that Heinrich Kramer would have burned, women who opposed patriarchal or historical figures. Consider this. Even if you want to say that Morgan wanting revenge on Arthur for cutting down her lover Acolion, I think it's justified for Morgan Le Fay to oppose Arthur when you consider how Arthur the Lesser came into being. I just realized, that's right where Aunt Linda falls into this list. She's the Enchantress. That's why she chose the costume. But I think the largest inspiration of Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters is none other than the Hungarian noblewoman and alleged serial killer Elizabeth Bathory. Countess of the powerful house of Bathory, Elizabeth and her 4 servants were accused of torturing and ending the lives of hundreds of girls and women between 1590 and 1610. It was said she mostly targeted young virgins who would either drink or bathe in their blood to maintain her youth and power, much in the same way that Count Dracula. The charges used against Lady Bathory have been described as a witch hunt by many historians, and that notion has merit. The 15 and 1600s were the height of Heinrich Kramer's religious genocide of pagans and Protestants, of which Bathory was raised Calvinist. During the 16th century Reformation and the 30 Years' War, Catholic persecution of Calvinists was prominent, so there's every reason to suspect the charges against Bathory were politically and religiously motivated. However, writers like Michael Farren claim that the accusations against Bathory were supported by testimony of over 300 individuals, some of whom described physical evidence of bodies and victims found barely clinging to life at the time of her arrest. Elizabeth was born in 1560 on the family estate in Hungary and spent much of her life in Exeter Castle. Her father was Baron George VI, and her mother was Anna Bathory of Cholmio. As a child, Bathory was said to have suffered from seizures and possibly epilepsy. At the time, this would have been diagnosed as falling sickness, and treatments included rubbing the blood of someone who did not suffer these seizures onto the lips of the person with epilepsy, or giving the affected person a mix of blood and a piece of skull as the episode ended. Supposedly, Bathory had a child at only age 13 that was fathered by a peasant boy. However, this only spread through rumors and hearsay long after her death, so the validity of the rumor is often disputed. Bathory's marriage to Count Ferenc was a political arrangement. She was 15 at the time and had been engaged to him for 5 years prior. Yikes! Elizabeth and Ferenc had 5 children: Anna, Ursula, Katalin, Andras, and Paul. 3 years after their marriage, Ferenc became the chief commander of Hungarian troops in the war against the Ottoman Empire, and Bathory was left in charge of her husband's estates. After 29 years of marriage, Count Ferenc died at the age of 48 due to an illness, although the exact nature of the illness that led to his death is unknown. It seemed to have started 3 years before he passed and initially caused debilitating pain in his legs. Before dying, Ferenc entrusted his heirs and his widow Elizabeth to Georg Thurzo, the person who would eventually lead the investigation into Bathory's crimes. But rumors of Bathory's atrocities already began to spread through the kingdom before the loss of her husband. Between 1602 and 1604, a Lutheran minister had made several complaints against her both publicly and in the court of Vienna, but it wasn't until 1610 that Matthias II assigned Thurzo to investigate. At the time, Thurzo ordered 2 notaries to collect evidence, and from March to October of that year, they collected 52 witness statements. By 1611, that number exploded to over 300. It doesn't actually make a lot of sense that so many people supposedly had this kind of dirt on Bathory, and it wasn't already a well-known and established fact. And the more I think a sensible modern person looks into it, the more it seems like a political conspiracy theory. Like a secret cabal of politicians supposedly drinking the blood of children in order to obtain adrenochrome for some sort of Satan-worshipping blood libel cult activity that has absolutely no basis in fact, and is little more than brain rot rambling by racists. But nonetheless, Elizabeth Bathory was said to have amassed a small cult of followers who helped her torture and murder the daughters of lesser gentry who were sent to her by their parents to learn courtly etiquette. The use of needles was also mentioned by collaborators in court among the extensive list of tortures said to have been carried out by Bathory. Probably the most damning thing in all of this, though, is that the imprisonment of Elizabeth Bathory was agreed on the 13th of December in 1612. It was also coincided with an agreement between Nicola VI and Thurzo over the distribution of her estate. It wasn't until a few weeks later, on New Year's Eve, that Thurzo went to her castle and arrested Bathory along with her 4 servants, Dorothea, Katerina, and Janos. Thurzo even wrote in a letter to his wife that when he arrived unannounced, he himself found 1 girl who had already been killed and 1 who was living as prey within the castle. However, we only ever have 1 attestation of this by Thurzo, as no evidence was ever produced to substantiate his claim. Although it's commonly believed that Bathory was caught in the act of torture, she was having dinner. Initially, Thurzo made the declaration to Bathory's guests and villagers that he had caught her red-handed. However, she was arrested and detained prior to the discovery or presentation of her victims. It seems most likely that the claim of Thurzo discovering Bathory covered in blood has been the embellishment of fictionalized accounts. Several authors have argued that Elizabeth Bathory was a victim of conspiracy. Nagy argued that the proceedings against Bathory were largely politically motivated, is possibly due to the extensive wealth and ownership of large areas of land in Hungary, which increased after the death of her husband. The theory is consistent with Hungarian history at the time, which included religious and political conflicts, especially relating to the wars of the Ottoman Empire, the spread of Protestantism, and the extension of Habsburg power over Hungary. Moreover, Matthias owed a large debt to Bathory, which was cancelled after she was arrested. The case of Elizabeth Bathory inspired numerous stories during the 18th and 19th centuries. The most common motif of these works was that of the Countess bathing in her virgin victim's blood to maintain beauty and youth. The legend appeared in print for the first time in 1729 in the Jesuit scholar Laszlo's Tragica History, the first written account of the Bathory case. The story came into question in 1817 when the witness accounts, which surfaced in 1765, were published for the first time. They included no reference to bloodbaths. In his book Hungary and Transylvania, published in 1850, John Paget describes the proposed origins of Bathory's blood bathing. Although this tale seems to be fictionalized recitation of oral history from the area, it's difficult to know how accurate his account of events is. Sadistic pleasure is considered a far more plausible motive to Bathory's crimes. Nonetheless, stories of Bathory's cruelty and bloodlust are prominent in popular media. She was even the main antagonist in the sequel novel to Bram Stoker's classic Dracula. In Dracula the Undead, written by Dacre Stoker and Ian Holt, she is the cousin of Dracula and was the motive behind his decision to move to London in the original novel, as she was murdering women under the guise of none other than Jack the Ripper. And this has led to many of the vampire myths surrounding the Countess. Given all that, the number of similarities between Bathory and Dimitrescu seems self-explanatory. Both maintain noble status even so far as to be called Countess. Both follow themes of blood and or immortality, torture and murder, as well as beauty and allure. Both were isolated in a grand castle and maintained a faction of female followers to help them carry out heinous acts. I don't know. I mean, many supposedly villainous women throughout history and even in popular media ended up being victims the more we read into their stories. There's a reason to suggest that Bathory may have been innocent entirely, that it was all just a political ploy, and that this was also the truth for Marie Antoinette, hundreds of witches between 15th and 17th centuries, and even religious figures like Tiamat, Lilith, and Cassandra. But then, I wonder, what was it that finally pushed Bathory over the edge? Did she become the monster that everyone thought she was in order to seek some sort of comeuppance or revenge? I only ask because, well, I've seen her in Atonement. Did you guys know she prefers redheads?
churchmen came, cross-beared at night, to shroud my name in endless lies. Walls of stone and whispers cold, horrors told, tall tales they wove. I bore their hates, heavy price, a noble heart, my life's device. Here is a bun cursed by fate, a tragic pawn, a tale of hate. Their voices hound me through the years, a countess drowned in blood and tears. A widow's name now drenched in shame, bound as torture's ruthless claim. They came with scripture, rope and sword, in holy guise by false accord. A countess framed for sins unmade, a martyr to their twisted blade. My crime, a fierce spirit they couldn't quell, a woman bold, now condemned to hell. By moon and mist, a legend born, from blood they shed, for lies they'd sworn. I walk again, a tale retold, Elizabeth, now fierce and cold. I wear their blade like poisoned lace, a vengeful mask, a soulless face, no longer bound by mortal chain. I haunt their cries, a wraith of pain, a voice, a whisper cold and deep. Your innocence in graves they'll keep. My vengeance drinks where justice bled, become the fiend they always dread. The church's wrath my curse became, a twisted life, a hollow name. They sealed my fate, yet freed my soul. In darkened fire I grew whole. While they called me monster, dark and dire, that night my fury became an endless fire. The blood they swore stained hands unclean, now drunk from all sharp and unseen. Let shadows crown my royal brow, a queen of night I rise not bow. Their lies, their scorn, a weapon forged, I embrace vengeance, rage no longer ignore. In legend's tongue my tale distorts, from victims' cries to curse retolls. I live again, reborn in night, a wraith, a queen, a bitter bite. The taste of iron, bittersweet, chains unbound, my strength complete. Once silent and cold, now fierce and free, I walk through holy and blasphemy.
Art for this week was by Denang-kun on Fiverr. He's a returning artist that you might remember from the Final Fantasy X crossover or even our Naruto fan art. If you liked the look of this art or those, please shoot them a commission on Fiverr. I'll be including a link to their business down in the description. Art for this channel wouldn't even be possible, however, without the help of our patrons. Monetization on YouTube is not enough to keep us going, so please follow the Patreon link down in the description to help Tales of Atonement keep going long term. We have a lot left to do and a big story to tell, and we simply can't do it without your help. Besides, there's a ton of extras only available on Patreon that won't be available for months on YouTube, if ever. Some of our great patrons include Pammy Poo, Shadow Fox, Arya Gamari, Charles Tam, Jace Moreland, and Lunder Lumen. Thank you all for watching and supporting our story.